I'd argue that if you're not actually doing something to do with change in a leadership role, then what on earth are you doing? Because you don't get many leading through stability programs or heads of status quo. Most of the time in organizations, slide decks are just containers for anxiety. And the bigger and prettier it is, the bigger the amount of anxiety being contained is. In your invariable need for speed, how do you know you're running 120 miles an hour in the right direction?
Welcome to Strategy Meets Reality. I'm your host, Mike Jones, and today I'm joined by Steve Hearsum, consultant, coach, and supervisor of change practitioners. We explore what happens when strategy is disconnected from change and leadership clings to control. From capability gaps to culture, anxiety, and organisational theatre, this conversation is about facing complexity and why the real work of change doesn't come with a silver bullet. Steve is also the author of No Silver Bullet, which we explore throughout the episode. Welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Thank you, Steve, for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I've been a great fan of your work, and it's been a pleasure that I've now met you twice in person, which is always good.
Twice. Yeah. You poor
So,
devil.
Just for the listeners, do you mind giving a bit of intro about yourself and what you've been up to lately?
Sure. So in a nutshell, I'm a consultant, a coach, and a supervisor of particularly consultants and change practitioners. Tend to do three things really. I specialize in leadership practice work because I believe that most conventional leadership development, or much of it, is a waste of time and money. I do skills development and capability building of change and OD practitioners and consultants. And the third thing probably goes under the big bucket of culture. But what I've been spending a lot of my time doing recently is believe it or not, recording an audiobook. So my book that came out last year, I've now decided to turn it into an audiobook, which meant I was in the basement of a studio in Brighton for the best part of 2 weeks talking.
Oh, wow.
So
There's a lot of movies that I think started with that, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, and I'll link Steve's great book, No Silver Bullets, to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike.
So you can all have a read. I totally recommend it. Which I think leads nicely on to first question, which is in your practice, we see organisations do a lot of things wrong. Definitely when it comes to sort of change in strategy. What are the reoccurring blind spots that you keep running into?
I was thinking about this before we came online, and I'm thinking about this particularly from the change perspective, which overlaps with your focus, which is strategy, and so it'd be interesting to see how we unpick these. But I kind of came up with a sequence of things, and I'm not suggesting it's linear, but it kind of fell out as a sequence of things. So the first thing is how organizations define and construe change. So what are the assumptions here around the nature of change? Is it, and what I mean by that is it something that they assume that can be planned? Is it something that they assume is part of everybody's work regardless of what they do? Or is it just the change specialists? Do they have any kind of idea or acceptance that change is actually a core component of any leadership role? I mean, I'd argue that if you're not actually doing something to do with change in a leadership role, then what on earth are you doing? Because you don't get many leading through stability programs or status quo or heads of status quo. So that kind of says to me that it's part of everybody's work. And so the assumptions bit is key. And that leads to what seems to happen in many organizations is the thingification of change. So you hear this in very simple turns of phrase. We need to land the change. It's probably the most clear example. It has the word "the" put in front of it. So it's been objectified and turned into an abstraction. And the reason I suspect that is done is because it makes it at face value simpler. It makes it less anxiety inducing, because if we've turned it into a thing, then we can just shove it around. We can project manage it.
Yeah.
We can give it to a centre of excellence. They can do it. And more importantly, we can abdicate responsibility. We can shove it into somebody else. And I've got other stuff, but I'll stop there because I've got about 3 other things. But I thought I'll stop there because you may have some responses to that.
No. Yeah, you're right. Definitely with the change. It's the same with strategy. It's almost there's a charade around it. I think tries to make it easier. So what I mean that is the change doesn't become an adaptation over time for a reason. And what we're trying to do, we're doing this because something has changed or something's happened in the external environment, and our response is this. We don't have the capability, or we do have the capability. If we don't have the capability, then we need to do something, but for an outcome or an effect we're trying to achieve. And I think they missed that for what you said. They say it's a thing, and then there's a song and dance around it. It has to have a name. It can't just be we're doing these things. It has to be this massive all
It's a
singing
project.
dancing thing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you use the C word in there, which I think is really important. So let's pull that out, the capability word, because I've worked on a number of capability building programs in large corporates where what we've had is we've had cohorts of often very talented internal change agents. Now, the label is kind of secondary. We're talking about a mix of all development people, design people, change people, maybe some HR people. But the common thread here is all of them were identified as people who would be needed to develop their change skills, their internal consulting skills to do good change work. But in almost every context, what happened, there's three big examples I can think of. No sooner had I finished working with them than the organization went into consultation for redundancies. And that community was put into the pot for headcount reduction. And what would happen is some of them would be redeployed, some of them would take redundancy, some of them would walk, some of them would be left, scratching their backsides, wondering what on earth was going on. And if you look at that with a little bit of distance, you kind of go, hang on a minute, what's just happened here? An organization has just paid a six-figure sum often to put, in one case, dozens and dozens of people through this program. And they've now just moved to get rid of the people who are probably the best equipped to facilitate change in the organization. And by the way, this happened to me when I worked at The Guardian as
okay,
well. So I've been in the middle of this. I've lived it from first person and not just third person. And I find that intriguing. And there's
yes,
a clue into this in terms of what's going on. I interviewed, as part of the diagnostic phase, a senior leader in a big UK corporate in the run up to one of these programs. And this person said to me, we need these people to operate at several levels above their pay grade. Now think about
okay,
that for a moment, right?
yeah,
So we need these people who we want to do good change work. We need them to be as good at critical thinking, as good at communication, as good at influencing, as good at dealing with conflict, as good strategically as senior leaders, but we will not give them the same money, the same status, and the same authority. And my hypothesis is it's part of an unconscious psychological splitting in many organizations. It's an abdication of responsibility. If we give it to these people, then we don't have to take responsibility ourselves.
yes. We talk about in strategy this metaphorical wall between the people that do the thinking, or the strategy, or the decisions, and they throw it over the wall to the people they expect to do it, and it's a massive disconnect.
That is interesting. So where I've immediately gone is, so what is going on here in the conversations? Well, I'm getting quite excited about this. In the conversations around both strategy and change in an organization, who is involved in those conversations? And to what extent are they joined up? And when are they sometimes deliberately uncoupled because it would be too anxiety inducing to couple them?
Yeah, and I always see it in the sense that there's a relationship between the external environment, the strategy, and I'm not talking about the people doing the strategy, but the strategy and org change, the ability to adapt, and the organisation currently in their relationship with the external. And there's all these connections that go in there that are feedback loops. Yeah, we know that every time we do something, especially the external environment, it's going to change in a way that we hoping to expect or not expect. And then we've got to go, well, what does this now mean to us in relative context of what we've already agreed? What changes are going on? What direction are we given? Is it still valid?
So here's a question for you, Mike. When I hear you, as I hear you talk, when because you tend to be working with senior leaders in organisations around strategy and how they make meaning of strategy and how they come up with a new strategy. Correct?
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's your sweet spot. When you scaffold those conversations, how often do you hear clients able to, as they talk about the strategy about for the organisation, are they able to then look in the mirror and go, so what that means for me and for us is that we need to, and specifically, are they able to have that conversation around the stuff where it's uncomfortable for them? So, for example, they may need to become less command and control. They may need to show up differently or whatever. Do you see much awareness of that?
We do, but I think that's a lot to do. Not initially when we go in. Like I can start asking around, what is your strategy for a start, which normally is quite an interesting one because they'll show me PowerPoint slide that they made to look like a Greek villa, and a load of just nonsense, and there's no connection with all the other ongoing stuff that's happening in the organisation, the expectations. There's no link. But I suppose the process that we go through, there always is that point where it gets uncomfortable for me when I'm doing it, because we can model as much as we want, but I don't know when it's going to hit them in the face and go, wow, that's what we need to do. That's clear to me. And then we turn it into going, okay, so now you understand the maneuvers you need to do. What does that mean? What does that mean to you as a leader? What does that mean to the organisation? What does that mean to all the other stuff that you committed to? What does that mean to your suppliers? We start to really try and pull that out, and it gets really uncomfortable.
So what's the discomfort?
It's a good question. I think discomfort is trying to translate from what we've agreed to action.
So my interpretation of that is you get to the point where they move from the theoretical to the practical. They have to go from look straight on paper to flipping egg. This is what it's actually going to mean, and this is what it's going to mean for me.
Yes,
I am going to have to take responsibility for this, or whatever it is. Is that what you're getting at?
yeah,
and
yeah.
They're faced, and my extrapolation of that is, and this is something I talk about in the book, is they're then faced with not knowing.
Yes,
they're faced with not knowing. For example, that they don't know what to do when it comes to a particular strategy or activity, or they don't know what's going to happen. Simply the anxiety of not knowing whether or not the strategy will work.
yeah, and that's a really good point. And there's that shroud around the perfect strategy or the perfect change. We will do this thing, and it will happen like this. It's that linear cause relationship that if we do these activities, then we will get this outcome. Where what we're trying to say to him is that you could do these activities, but you've got to observe to see if you're going to get those outcomes. And I think, too often, I think it's too ingrained with people, leaders and organizations, is this sense of predictability that, it's almost, we've reduced it to simple things that we do this, like we get together, we have a fun day, we create a vision statement, we get in a internal comms team or a consultancy comms team, we make a big flashy show about it, we tell our people, and it will happen.
You get me thinking again here, Mike, which is, so one of the things I think about a lot and I write about is collusive behaviours, unconscious collusive behaviours between clients and solution providers. And one of my clients told me a story recently that still has me kind of banging my head quietly against the nearest wall. And they were describing to me in this very large global corporate how the senior leadership team, the exec, were really insistent on working with a quite high profile search and selection business who, I don't know if you've come across them, but quite a few of these organizations set up leadership and change practices alongside.
Yes,
and I've not come across one that I've not heard bad things about. I'm sure there are some good ones, but I've not heard of any yet. And this agency very excitedly on this call with the global team, with the 3 OD people sitting quietly just listening to this, said, we've got this brilliant way that we've come up with to embed culture change. And the OD team sat there going, okay, this is going to be interesting. And then proceeded to reveal that the brilliant idea was posters.
Yeah, I want to bang my head against this as well.
Right. And my point here is, if that is the level of thinking in the interconnected systems of senior search consultancies and the executives who they cater to and who they schmooze, that goes unchallenged, is the problem maybe a wee bit more difficult for people like me and you than we realise?
Yeah.
Genuine question.
Yeah, it is, especially because you're the same as me. We're a small, more bespoke consultancy, more of a choice rather than anything like that. And we're real practitioners, and we take pride in our craft, and we want to do things correct and not correct. We know, but we do it seriously. And it's hard because when we're going up against these big machines that are saying, "Oh no, this is what you're doing," it's all pretty shiny stuff. Then we're going, no, actually, it's going to be a lot harder than that. And actually, we need to commit to these things. That shiny way of going, oh, what? I just need a few posters. Yeah, that'd be great. It does make it very difficult.
It's anxiety management, it contains it totally. Yeah, where did I go? I had a quick series of lateral jumps. That's where I went to. Was it got me wondering about, therefore, how power is exercised in relation to this? So um, I was talking last week or the week before to Niels Fleging, who I think we talked about last
Yes,
week when
yeah,
I saw you.
I've connected with
I
him.
was talking to Niels about his work because he's got a very clear methodology and approach, Beta Codex, um, and he's really clear that unless the most senior person in the organisation is up for it and is committed to it and will basically be in the organisation for about 100 days without any holidays and is going to be available, then he won't work with them. And his line is simply that it will stand or fall on the most powerful person in the organisation. So there's no point in doing any of the change work unless they're in. And it's quite challenging for somebody like me, because there's this view also in OD circles that change can come bottom down, sort of from the bottom up.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
can be kind of more viral or disruptive. But equally, if I link that to some of the research around leadership development, what Jeffrey Pfeffer says is that one of the problems with leadership development is that you have a brilliant program, everybody gets spat out, fully activated and ready to go and do good work, and they'll revert within a few months if the culture they're going back into isn't actually receptive to them.
yeah,
It hasn't really changed. So I'm just chewing on what power means for what we're talking about, I guess.
yeah. This sort of, and I agree with both. You need to have um, the top aligned. Even when you're looking at transfer training, constant things in transfer training is that you've got peer support, the content relevant and actually helpful. And then the other one is leadership support, i.e. does the leadership buy into this and are they going to support you to transfer that in? When you think about the bottom up, that's where you start getting into decentralized decision making. And is that context there ready and available that people can be given a clear intent about what you want and allow them to understand how to deliver it? You haven't got that and it's all just down, then it becomes very difficult for something to bottom up to come happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was cooked by a word you used there, which is, what do you understand by aligned, and what's aligned enough?
That's a good question. It's not aligned as in, well, I prefer the word coherence. Are
Okay,
we?
nice.
Yeah. So, and what we mean by that is that do we have enough clear intent, minimal constraints, but there will be some constraints in there that gives them the freedom of action. And that then enables them to adapt under changing circumstances. If we're too aligned and there's no freedom of action, then we've got nowhere to go. We'll just crumble as soon as things happen. Yeah. And that sort of coherence comes from a very viable systems model, systems thinking approach.
Because you can have too much alignment, too much
Yes.
coherence.
Yeah.
That's when you get homogeneity,
Yeah.
homeostasis.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
always that balance, isn't it? Because this is where you have the argument with these organizations about completely flat organizations and holacracy and all this stuff.
Holacracy.
Yeah. And, it challenge those because it goes the other way is that you might not have enough coherence or alignment. And then you could rapidly go into chaos, and organizations are always balancing this thing between stability and chaos.
Well, one of the things about this is a bit of tangent, but I'm going to throw it in because it fascinates me, and I don't hear anybody really talking about it. Have you come across Snakes in Suits?
No, I haven't. No.
It's a book co-authored by David Hare, the guy who came up with the psychopathy test.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Snake
um,
suits.
in it, he talks at one point about how the move towards flat structures and more autonomous working and pulling down the bureaucracy, in some respects, yeah, useful. But the problem is that creates the conditions that narcissists and sociopaths thrive in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because they work well when they don't have to worry about boundaries that will force them to be consistent in terms of how they show up in multiple contexts.
Mm,
Free to show up however they want in multiple contexts, they can present whatever version of themselves they wish to,
yeah.
depending on what they want. And so his argument is that the move towards that kind of structure increases the likelihood of those sorts of personalities and people to actually gain more influence.
And that's why,
So I don't have an answer. I just have a kind of wondering around that.
yeah, because our friend Nikita, he talks about it that in startups you tend to find more of those type of people because there's less boundary. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a very big startup that I know two or three people who've worked in, and I'm not going to name them, but they're quite sizable and very well known in London. And one of my clients worked there for a while, and she was on one of my programs, and it was fascinating listening to her because it total lack of boundaries, a founder who just wanted everybody to be free to say what they did when they wanted, but it meant that he could play games whenever he wanted to.
Mm,
Sounded really unsafe.
yes. Then you start getting some of these, you start seeing more cultish behaviour rather than they sort of start to create the organisation and the image of themselves. And that's
Yeah,
why with this thing around, I talk, anyone that follows me talk about, I talk about decentralization, self-organizing teams. But what I mean is that to do that, you need to have a good coherence, good governing principles, decision rights in there.
yeah.
Otherwise, you can go into this chaos bit quite quickly. Avoid that.
Where have we got to in our question?
Uh, I don't know, but I'm having fun though. The one thing I pick up though with the part we're talking about is the thing that always gets me is around the charade that organisations play. And I've sort of picked up a bit about you talk about change and it has to be this thing,
Hmm.
you make big smoke and mirrors about it. But, what do you think causes this organisation to revert? I call it marketing and PR. I think marketing and PR has absorbed change, absorbed strategy, and absorbed leadership programs. So we're not really dealing with these things. We're just making things look snazzy.
My immediate, without having had a chance to reflect on it long, my immediate response is I suspect it's several things, and in what order and what scale of importance or order of importance, I don't know. So one is if you orientate towards command and control, then that's going to shove you that route. If you have a conventional as opposed to a post-conventional set of assumptions around change, it will shove you that way because you can then market it. It's 8 steps, isn't it? Almost 10 steps. It's
Yeah,
however many steps.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
you'll market the simplicity of whatever it is you're thinking. So that's one set of reasons. Another set would be, this is a slightly, I'm noticing my slight cynicism in this, is a very conscious what's in it for meanness.
Yeah,
So if I get to build my empire, or I get to ensure that others who I'm competing with are discounted or removed from the system, that might influence how I then market and simplify things. Another one, though, probably the biggest, would be different forms of anxiety, which is if I really accept anxiety that I have around my lack of control or not knowing, or if I'm in touch with the shame potentially that might be evoked if it's revealed that I don't know as much as everyone thinks I do, then that's going to drive me towards oversimplifying stuff.
yeah, yeah,
So one of my kind of throwaway, slightly flippant phrases, which I get occasionally challenged on, but I hold to, is that most of the time in organisations, slide decks are just containers for anxiety, and the bigger and prettier it is, the bigger the amount of anxiety being contained is.
yes. Yeah, you know what? Starting up as a consultant, that was my anxiety because I used to see these big consultancies slide decks and they'd be lovely. Oh, it'd be so pretty. And I'll look at mine. Mine are like Johnny Ace 5. They're still like Johnny Ace 5 now. But then I've got over that fact that I'd rather have substance than beauty.
Well, it's interesting you say that. It's one of my favourite stories told to me by the guy who's anonymised in my book, who's a very good English consultant now based in Canada, but works in North America as well. And he told me this lovely story about pitching for a piece of work with a corporate. So he turns up, and the person who's kind of, what's the word, managing the pitching process says, "Where's your slide deck?" And he goes to him, "I haven't got one." He says, "But you have to have one." "Oh, I don't need one." He goes, "Well, you have to have one." He says, "Okay, okay." So he goes away, and in reception, he creates two slides that basically just say, "This is who I am." But they're meaningless. And he goes in, and bear in mind, he's competing against the PwCs and BCGs of this world, and big consultancy firms. And there's this one guy with this small consultancy. And he walks in, and he says, "I've been told I have to have a slide deck. Here it is." But actually, he doesn't say anything. And he just gets into the conversation. And of course, the punchline is he wins the business because he's actually got to have the conversation.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. I think getting over that, but I went on a slight tangent there. But when you're talking about change and that anxiety inducing element, I see it a lot happen when we got leaders in, we've got people into the change, we've had a debate around all the strategy or change. And then it comes to the point where they need to then go and execute. And often we're seeing this projection that it's no longer, I'm not part of the change. The change is being done to me, even though I've been in that conversation. And you hear him saying language like, Dave's told us to do this, Dave being the leader or their boss. And there's not this ownership to get the change done, which I think is quite crucial. They just project it off.
Yeah, it's lurking in there is something around whose is it, and how often is change construed as something that is done by a sole set of people. Who is determined, or who is it decided who is allowed to be in that conversation? I mean, I have a real problem, for example, with the whole language of resistance to change.
Same, yeah.
The way it's used in ProSci, and ProSci's got some good stuff in it, but one of the reasons I critique it in my book is because I think it's part of the mythologizing of something that is deeply damaging.
Yeah.
It pathologizes whole groups of people and organizations as being resistant and assumes that by definition they're wrong.
Yeah.
That's the most horrifying thing. The assumption is by definition somebody who resists is wrong.
Well, you only have to go into organisations. As soon as you mention change, everybody talks about Cotter's 8 steps. And still. And you're thinking, well, it's fine. There's elements that are good at it, but I still have my critiques about things. Like, I know he changed it later on, but it was pretty much in there, like, anyone resists it, pretty much lock them in the room and get rid of them.
Oh, yeah.
I know he tried to change that later on. But the other thing is about this burning platform. And, you were talking earlier, there's no stability programs for leaders or anything like that. But we've always got this tension going on between change and status quo and adaptation. But we know that there's only so much change a team can handle at any one time. And really, we want to get the change with minimal disruption to the operations. We don't want to unsettle the organisation beyond what it can handle. So this whole thing of let's create a burning platform and urgency, I just challenge that as in, are you trying to unsettle the organisation more than necessarily needed?
There's okay. Let's take the obvious one. For a start, it's a totalitarian metaphor.
Yeah,
and it's a brutalist metaphor. It assumes that the only reason people will want to change is because you threaten them with death and dying.
Yeah.
So on that basis alone, I despise it as a metaphor. But it also assumes that people are not intelligent enough to make decisions about how things might change, which is kind of ironic when you consider something like every single episode of Undercover Boss that's been filmed in Australia, the UK, and the US, and every other territory it was in, where the single message of every episode from every CEO and leader at the end of it is, I never would have known that unless I'd have gone and talked to people in the front line who run my business.
Yeah.
So I kind of think the whole burning platform thing is, I think, what's the technical term, Mike? Bollocks.
Yes. Yeah.
Dangerous bollocks at that.
It is. And we're just unsettling. It's like we're trying to we're forcing the change. Again, come back to your point about change being completely managed and forced through. Previous episode, we were with Julia Hautz, one of the co-authors of Open Approach to Strategy. And we're talking about how do you open it up. Really, it's a sense of how do you involve those people at the edge of the organisation? Because I still think there is a bias thinking that I'm a strategic leader, so I must know all the answers. When really, yes, we've got to make decisions, but there's nothing stopping me from getting out of my office, walking several layers down, and just speaking to people.
Well, there's two things that immediately come into mind when you say that. One is the assumption that every single leader really is comfortable walking the floor. And it's surprising. I can think of two leaders I've worked with in my career who had the walking the floor thing down to a T, and they did it intentionally and beautifully in subtly different ways. But to walk the floor, you need to be willing to be visible, and you need to be willing to get into conversation.
Yeah.
And be willing to be open to the possibility someone may ask you a question you're not expecting. That's what strikes me with that is and the other bit is one of the stories in the book from the lovely Eva Applebaum, who now works for Gate One, part of the Havas Group. And she
Yes.
was telling me about some of her work a few years ago in the digital space, because she's got a very strong track record in digitalization. And she said one of the biggest challenges working with senior leadership teams when it came to digital transformation was these were people typically who had signed off often millions of pounds worth of investment in technology, and they didn't understand what they bought, but they couldn't admit that they didn't understand what they bought. So just think about that for a moment. So these are people who are making a strategic decision. So back in your space, they've got a strategy to invest in e-commerce or digitization, but they don't actually understand what it is they've bought.
Mm,
And they
that's scary,
can't
isn't it?
talk about it. Not really.
It reminds me of time when I went back to, I was in the military and I was back to the army. I went to headquarters and I wasn't technical at all, but I had technical soldiers. And I remember the general's chief of staff called me up and he was like, "We need you to come brief the general on the state of this equipment that it had." I
Mm.
was like, "Well, I'm not the best person because I don't have a clue what it is." So I saw one of them. And he's a lance corporal. So in soldier terms, he's a private lance corporal. So this guy was, yeah, this guy was clearly an intelligent bloke, knew exactly what he wanted, knew everything about it. So I was like, Corporal Gurung, go speak to the general, and he wants a brief on what's going on. And then he comes back 2 minutes later. I was like, "That was quick." He goes, "Oh no, the chief of staff sent me away. They said wanted you." I was like, "Oh." So I took the soldier with me, and I was like, "Right." And I made a point. I was like, "General, what do you want to know?" And they were like, "Oh, I want to know about this." And I just turned to the soldier and just repeated the question. And the soldier gave
I
me the
love that.
answer, and I just repeated it back. I got a firm telling off afterwards,
I love
but
that. That is, I'm gonna be telling that story and referring to you by name. That is lovely. I love that. That's
and
brilliant.
it's up to that point, isn't it? It's that I've got to make decisions, and I'm making informed decisions, but I don't have to be the expert at everything because, funny enough, I pay these people to be experts. I give them a role, I give them responsibility to be experts.
Yeah, but one of the things this is then opening up, this is one of my kind of current threads of inquiry in my practice, and I work with practitioners around. I'm trying to work out ways to bring it into the leadership space, but you'll understand why this is a bit trickier. Is I talk about the fragility of practitioners and leaders, and
Mm.
what happens when the fragility of the practitioner meets that of the client, or the fragility of the consultant meets that of the client. And an example of this is if I said to you, Mike, how do you know you're an expert?
Oh yeah. Well, that's a
Who,
yeah.
who, who's told you? And what happens when your client says to you, oh, Mike, you're an expert in this, and you know you're not? Do you tell them?
Well, well, yeah. Well, I do in practice. I know what I know, and I like to think I know that I don't know. But I've had it loads of times where they've said, "Oh, we want to go do." I had this one recently actually where
Yeah.
they're going on about it, and we're talking about structural change and doing that stuff, which I'm happy with, and I get the information. But then they're talking about digital stuff and AI, and that's where I had to say, "I'm not your guy for this," but I know
Hmm.
someone. I know someone who's very capable
But you see,
to do that.
this is the interesting thing. Some of the research shows that one of the things consultants are not always prone to do is to tell their clients where they're not expert in what it is the client wants. It's part of
Ah,
the
right, yeah,
ethical
yeah,
shadow of our world because, we as a breed, we need to earn money. And the subset of us who are prepared to go, I don't know that, go and talk to Mike. So if I had a client who wanted to know about strategy, Mike, I mean, you're now on my list of people are saying, talk to Mike.
oh, thank you.
He knows this stuff because I can't hand on heart say that strategy is something that I know how to scaffold in a way that I could probably come up with something, but I know
Yeah,
it wouldn't
yeah,
be
yeah.
as informed or as well thought through as what you spent a lot of your time doing.
Mm.
But there are plenty of us who will collude with the client because we need the work or believe we need it.
Yes, yeah. You see that a lot, and that's why there's a lot of bad practice. I'll bang, like you said earlier, I'll bang my head against the wall when I see
Yeah.
certain things on like LinkedIn. They're going, "Oh, we've had a strategy J," and you see it, and they're like on Go Ape. You're like, "That's not." I don't know where to start with that. That's definitely not strategy. It's a nice day,
I'm not saying don't go to Go Ape or
Have
play
people
games.
really done that? Have they seriously? They've called it strategy day and gone and go out.
Yeah, you see it all the time. They got like they go, we have a strategy day, and it looks like they spend most of the time doing team building exercises, and then they'll the last part of it they'll scrabble over a vision statement, and they think a vision statement is strategy when they've not probably spent even 30 seconds remotely looking external and going, what's our relationship with the external environment? Where do we fit in that? It's pure like, well, it's that aspiration first. And I think this is the same in change as in strategy, that they come up with an aspiration first without understanding the context.
Yeah.
They don't know where they fit in the relationship, but they're going, oh, we want to be the best in this. They've not even understood the relationship with the external environment. It's the same with change. Oh, we want this, but really, do they need that? Is that the problem that is happening on the ground? There's one, I can't really say too much, but a client I was working with, they put a whole big change around something that was already happening on the ground. They put a big change in it. It disrupted everything. So like we're pretty much doing that. What's the problem? And it created more angst and cynicism, and people just wanted to leave the organisation because they're like, why are we unsettling all this stuff when we're pretty much doing it?
Yeah. Well, there's it's one of who is up on it? Yeah, one of Adam Grant's books in the originals. Somewhere in it he talks about how even when you communicate change well, you have to do it 10 times more than you actually think you do,
Yeah.
because people will both filter it out, but also because their immediate default responses is it's going to be bad news.
Yes.
You'll need to keep on saying, no, it's about this. This is what it's about. This is
And that's where the skills of coaching, where you see in organisations, coaching still gets just boiled down to, if I'm going to have anything to do with coaching, I need to have 45 minutes in a room, one-to-one, where really when it comes to like change, no one's thinking, well, I won't ask that question. What, instead of telling, why don't I just say, what does this change mean to you? And what new capabilities do you think you need to be able to enact this change?
Yeah. But then it's interesting. Again, we got back to kind of capabilities, and I don't have an answer to this, an easy answer. It's one of the reasons why the next book I'm doing with a person who I'm not going to name yet because we've not agreed yet when we're going to announce it. But we're co-authoring. She's an internal in a big European corporate. I'm an external, and what we're chewing on is what does it take to do change work well in an organisation, but writing it from the perspective of an external and an internal.
That'd be good.
And we hypothesis is that's not a kind of overlapping set of lenses that tends to be brought together. It tends to be written about either from the external or from the internal perspective or from the leadership perspective. And we're kind of going, wait a minute, what if we look at this slightly differently? And the question of capability, this is where kind of how we met, what we started talking about is there's something about how change is construed and the way in which it's the people who supposedly have to have the capability, the way they're actually organized and organizing within organizations is not thought through enough, and is both part of the solution but also reflective often of the dysfunction.
Yes. Yeah, it comes to your point around, I think people get so fixated in the thing, they've objectified this change. They've lost then focus on, if we do this, what does that mean to our organisation? What does that mean to our people? And ultimately, what outcome are we hoping to achieve by doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's really interesting, two lenses to look at from the internal and external, because I'm mainly external, but I support internal because I don't want to do the change upon an organisation. I'd rather they build that capability themselves to do change, and I can support them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, definitely interesting world. And I think, what else do you think frustrates you the most in sort of being this as an outsider?
Frustrates me. I suppose it's more not frustrates. I suppose it saddens me. Well, the frustration is that we spend more time finding new ways to reframe the problems that we already know than actually having the conversations about how we are actually going to wrestle with those and what it's like to wrestle with them and what we might actually choose to do differently and how we might need to be differently and what that's like and how hard it is and what happens when we do that. so long as we carry on reframing and researching more what the problem is, even though we already know what the problem is, we get to avoid the discomfort.
Yes.
So that kind of frustrates me and saddens me. The other bit is, and it's why I ran this thing with Martin Ciorda a few weeks ago about shame and violence in organisations. I think it's interesting how there is so little that is being really talked about openly in terms of how the discourse outside organisations, in terms of how it's not possible to be nuanced or ambivalent about things. We have to take fixed positions, either for and against things,
Yes. Yeah.
politically and so on. The idea that that happens in a vacuum and is not impacting how people lead organisations or how they show up is frankly absurd, total denial of reality. But there's relatively little that's actually talked about in that space. The DEI thing which is where it might have been contained, because now that's being dumped all over and now scapegoated, means that I kind of question where the spaces are to have more nuanced conversations in organisations about the stuff we find quite tricky to talk about, because we clearly can't do it that well outside.
No.
Yet, paradoxically, if I come back to your space, Mike, I would imagine that when you're working with a senior leadership team and talking about strategy, you need to be both pretty clear-sighted and clear thinking, but at the same time, you need to be pretty good at working with some of the intricacies in the mess and nuance. You can't think in binary terms.
No.
Right?
Yeah. And it's something I've been thinking about or looking at for a while. And I call it cognitive security. How willing in the world of strategy and that it's all about having perspectives and open up about your perspective. What are you seeing versus what everybody else is seeing, etc., etc. But I think more that we're seeing externally, people are more closed to the debates because they don't want to open up about what they actually think, or they're just going, or we're getting ourselves into this vacuum now externally, and we're not willing to see it from different perspectives. We're only seeing it from one perspective. And I wonder then how much our orientation with reality is getting shaped by that lack of discourse that we're seeing.
So I'm just going to read something to you because I was trying to dig out some of the exchanges I'd had with my co-author.
Yeah.
This is something she wrote. It's not marked from my head, and it resonates for some reason what we've been talking about. This is what she said, quote, "One thought I've been keeping in my mind is around what do we mean by the very word change when we define the subsequent capability. To me, it simultaneously, sequentially, means change as the desired outcome, and change as the process to get the change as the desired. Change as an outcome is, historically and adamantly preserved as such, the prerogative of senior leadership, the demigods of strategic decision-making. Change as the process and implementation is graciously delegated upon the change resources. This is why the change capability development is mostly around implementation skills and enthusiastic tools wielding, and hardly ever touches on strategic thinking, decision-making, vision, and innovation. And this is also why change only needs to be managed below senior levels. Change management as it stands today has nothing in it along the lines of change thinking, change scenario framing, change vision creation, yet everything to do with making it happen smoothly, orderly, yet enthusiastically and irreversibly."
That's fantastic. And you're seeing it, like, the reason why I create this podcast around challenging those lies around stability, predictability, and linear cause relationship. And what I took from that is quite clearly is around the disconnect between the strategy people thinking about what they want and then it just getting distilled down to the people to execute how they want it, rather than getting people into the thing around, well, let's think about what we are trying to do and what effect we are trying to have. And I always talk our effect with the external environment because that's what I think it goes to. How we get there and how we deliver that change, that's where we need to get people in. It's not a defined set of principles, not a defined object. It's an iteration, it's an adaptation over time to get there.
And maybe as we, because we're getting close to the end of our conversation, I'm starting to wonder where we're getting to as a natural question or point of, I'll ask it as a question because I don't have an clear answer to it, is this kind of split between strategy and change arbitrary? And do organizations tend to separate the two out way more than they should?
I would say yes. I say that just for experience because, I ask organizations often, what change have you got currently going on? why are you doing those things, and how is that connected to what you're trying to achieve? And I tend to get a very sort of unsure. I never get a definitive, well, we're doing that because we're trying to achieve that effect, which then enables us to do this in the long term. I normally get because it came from central, or it was someone's idea that we had.
Yeah.
Like, okay. And I think there really is a massive unnecessary disconnect.
Yeah. All right, we fixed it then, Mike.
And there we go. Don't have a disconnect. Yeah, it makes me, I've been modeling this relationship for a while and trying to figure out how best to describe it, the relationship that needs to exist between the strategy, the change in the organization, and the feedback loops to ensure that they're all there. Otherwise, you're wasting vast amount of emotional, cognitive, and financial effort. For
Totally.
what may not be actually effective. Sound. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise.
I think we just keep on going. But what would you like listeners and leaders to go away and think about from this podcast, from our conversation?
I'm going to try and say this without it sounding a bit kind of hackneyed or a bit too cliched. The phrase that popped into my mind was something like, what would it take you to slow down long enough to notice what it is you are uncomfortable about, and to think more deeply and to inquire into that discomfort with the other people who have a stake in your discomfort. The reason I say that, Mike, is because one of the cliches of the kind of work I do with clients is to use language like, I'm going to slow you down to speed you up. This is slow burn work. And invariably, I had it recently, it's like I told a whole group of people, the first day, this is going to feel slow. I told them, and the feedback afterwards, the first morning was too slow. It was too slow.
Yeah.
They find it so difficult to maintain a level of awareness, to take in, even when somebody's told them what they're going to be doing, why they're doing it, what something's going to be like. They filter it out. That's how high the levels of anxiety are and the tuning out of discomfort.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is to people listening is, in your invariable need for speed, because I suspect most people who listen are going to be moving quite fast, because that's the rhetoric and that's the discourse. How do you know you're running at 120 miles an hour in the right direction? Are you actually really going over a cliff or into a wall? How do you actually know? What data have you really slowed down to take into account? How do you even define data? Is it hard data? Have you gone and talked to people? Have you found out what people are talking about, what the stories and narratives are? Have you asked people what they're feeling? It's fascinating when you ask people in organizations to describe their feelings, and they can only come up with happy, sad, frustrated, angry, disappointed, embarrassed, and that's it. And they don't, I had a conversation with somebody recently and opened up the space for a more detailed conversation about the breadth of emotion, and the word that opened things up when we were talking about a visual with lots of different nuances and feeling. The word that opened things up and took us to a whole new level of insight was the word grief.
Right.
That's
interesting.
And so my question then stands is, in this need for speed, what are we avoiding? And those who are listening, what would it take you if you slow down and engage in a deeper level of conversation and ask questions of yourself and others that might lead you to the point where you start to talk about the things you're avoiding talking about with yourself and with each other?
Yeah, I think that's how we have a saying in the military: slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. It's all about how we do
so
our
let
drills.
me get this right. So that comes from a need to make sure that I've immediately gone to a kind of a firefight situation. If you move fast in a firefight, you'll literally get your head blown off.
Yeah,
so you
it's
slow
all
down
part of
long
our
enough.
Training, yeah. So it's all
slow down long enough to know, are you moving at the appropriate pace to the context?
Yeah, and it's us getting used to our drills and stuff like that in the practice. That
Love that.
If we rush our practice and how we do it, we're always going to have that anxiety. Where I think when we slow it down in practice, slow is smooth, we get it right, so it becomes second nature. So when it actually happens in reality, we're nice and smooth.
Have you ever written anything about that?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. Maybe I should do.
I'd encourage you to, or if you want, I'll co-author something with you, because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that'd be good. I think that'd be a good thing to work together on.
I think it's a really important, frame, and I think it's got multiple applications. It's not military. It's across any human system where there's change going on. I think it's really useful.
Yeah. And I think there's that challenge all the time is getting leaders to slow down. I was one of the previous podcasts with Adam Thompson. We talk about, when we're asking people to do stuff like change or strategy, do we ever just stop and say, let's just get in a room, let's talk about it, let's understand what we're actually asking people to do or asking you to do, and then let's have a chat about it. But no, we don't. We just go do this and we run off. And yeah, I think that comes to that point where our need to try and do something, we just run off and we wonder, actually, are we just running off in the wrong direction? Meaning well, but
yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. I like that.
That
awesome.
may go into the next book, and I'll credit you, Mike.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of things come out of this podcast. It's great. We solved the world, and then we co-authoring stuff. I'm going to get credit. But seriously, in the book.
That's not a kind of throwaway thing. I'd really be interested. I mean, I thought, I could write something about that. And I thought, well, why would I do it on my own, given the fact you're the source? So if you've got energy, then let's see whether we can.
Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very much, Steve, for joining me. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Likewise.
So, listeners, if you really like the conversation as much as we've enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share to your network, because someone else may find this conversation also useful. So I'll see you next time. See you. Bye.